It is a pleasure to be with you this morning. I looked at Craig just a second ago and I said, is it too late to back out? This can be very nerve-wracking to me. As Craig said, 16 and a half years ago, we joined with what was then Lake City's Community Church. Unfortunately, it's only our first time to be in the new building. This is beautiful. This is a goal of many years. We've come a long ways from loading the trailer and driving to Cullen's Lake Point Elementary School to unpack everything in the cafeteria to have church and then pack up and go home again. Craig said, I have a passion for marriage, and that's true. When I was 19, I was a prodigal, and the Lord thumped me on the head and said, hey, remember me? And I went back to church because I wanted to. And I was astonished because the pastor was so kind and so gentle and so considerate of his wife. I'd never seen anything like it. You see, I came from a marriage, a family. Oh, thank you, Judy. Where my parents separated 7 times over 12 years. They literally moved into other houses and moved back. I know some of you dealt with harsher or harder things than that, but all I saw was something very dysfunctional. And at 19, I watched Ron and Vicky for about 9 months, and I went to him one day because I've never seen anything like this. There was not a member of my family, anybody that I knew, that had a relationship like they did. And I said, how long have you been married? And he said, 15 years. And the synapses just stopped firing. Wow, I didn't know you could do this. And I processed things verbally, and I'm turning to walk away, and I said, it's like you're on your honeymoon. And he heard me, and he said, we are. What? He said, we are. Really? He said, yeah. I didn't know you could do that. I'd never seen anything like this. I got to watch him for 4 more years. He was the pastor that performed ceremony when I got to meet my beautiful bride. Last November, we celebrated 40 years, so we own it. We're old. I know some of you are ahead of us, but it's been a blessing. It's been a challenge. I have learned a lot from her. I hope I've taught her some things. But it's been a wonderful ride. This morning, Craig said, oh, you get 30 minutes. Oh, my goodness. What can I hit in 30 minutes to try to encourage you, challenge you, enrich you, give you something very practical? I like to deal with things practically. I hope I give you some tools to take with you or some resources that you can reach out to enhance your relationship. So, what is love anyway? Yeah, Tina said it's a secondhand emotion. There's another lyric up there that said, who needs a heart because it's only going to get broken? Really? So I've got a challenge for you, just mentally, real quick. See if you can write a definition for love. Just in your head, can you formulate a definition? Now, it's been a while since you've been in school, so remember, if you're writing a definition, you don't get to use the word. And we're not doing like Tevye and Golda, because when Tevye said, do you love me? She's like, what? What are you talking about? And she lists all this stuff. I wash your clothes, I cook your meals, I milked your cow, I shared your bed. Okay. You might be able to do that with a roommate. What is love? Now, before we get started, I want to challenge you to get the most benefit out of today. I'm talking to you, not your spouse, to you. So if I say something and you go, oh, did you hear that? Yeah, you're probably not going to get the most out of this, all right? I'm talking to you, okay? The only person in this room that you can affect change with is you. We don't have the power to change our spouse. God didn't grant us that power or give us Harry Potter's wand, right? We can't make them do anything. So please keep that in mind. What is love? I love my wife. I like the shirt, Ollie. I love the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Longhorns. I hope we can still be friends. I love Bluebell ice cream. Wait a minute. 3 vastly different things. The single most important person in the world to me, because all my kids have fled the nest, right? We have the empty nest. So I love my wife. Sports on TV and dessert, and yet we use the same word. English leaves us very lacking sometimes with their ability to communicate. Okay? So, I'm going to look at 4 words from Greek because they show they open up, they peel back some layers of the onion for us to look at some different nuances of love, okay? The first is probably the one that everybody in here might be familiar with, agape, right? If you read 1 Corinthians 13, Paul said, if I have the tongue of men and of angels and I don't have love, I'm a sounding brass and a clanging cymbal. He's talking about agape throughout 1 Corinthians 13. Well, what's special about agape? Well, it's selfless, it's sacrificial, it's unconditional. Deference is at the heart of agape, okay? It's going to supersede all the other loves that we're talking about this morning, okay? But you need to understand something. Agape is costly. It's going to cost you. It might cost you time. It might cost you money. It might cost you something that you desire. Again, agape is at the root of deference, the ability to put your spouse ahead of you. Agape requires work, okay? If we're talking about it in relationship, it's more than accepting or just tolerating your spouse's negative or destructive patterns of relating. Y'all probably don't have that issue, but just in case, I thought, yeah. Negative or destructive powers. It means working towards change no matter how hard that change is. Okay? We don't agape our spouse. We don't love our spouse because they deserve it. We do it because we made a vow. As a believer in Jesus Christ, when you make those vows, you're making those vows to God on behalf of your spouse. For richer or poorer, better or worse, sickness and health, till death do us part. Sometimes you might be frustrated and say, well, I wish death would come quicker. But it's an eternal commitment is agape, okay? Another word for love, philia, right? Probably familiar with this word. It's where we get Philadelphia. Nickname for the city of Philadelphia is City of Brotherly Love. It's talking about a camaraderie, a friendship, loyalty, respect, equality, right? Familiar with the Old Testament? David and Jonathan. Intense commitment, love, and loyalty between those two men. Jonathan understood, though my daddy's king, I'm not going to get to be king. This dad's line is not going to continue. David, you're going to be king. And he committed himself to helping David. You reckon that's important in a marriage? The need to be friends. The need to have fun together. This form of love is easy to overlook when life gets busy or when one or both partners get frustrated. It can be easy to ignore. But when your partner is not only a friend, then you'll have more fun and more laughter. Okay? Eros. It's That's where we get the word erotic. It's emotional intimacy. Nobody but God knows you better than your spouse. Right? Over time, this love can die out, though, if it's not purposefully and intentionally fueled. It takes a tremendous amount of work. It's a continuous pursuit of winning the heart of your spouse. I think sometimes in the West, men, we can be guilty. Wedding day is like going on a big game hunt. I got what I was after, I'm done. No, rubber ducky, you're just starting. This is the first day of the rest of your life that you get to love your spouse. And she needs that continual pursuit. She needs to know every day that you do it all over again. That you still find her beautiful and wonderful and attractive. When I was young, I was pretty stupid and pretty shallow. I didn't realize how beautiful a 65-year-old woman could be. She owns it. I have not said anything that would embarrass her. She'll put it out there, okay? Or if you'd prefer, her 36th anniversary of her 29th birthday. But eros is important, okay? Last one, storge, familial affection and compassion. This is Mama Bear looking after her cubs. Got the privilege of working in Colorado back in around 1980, and there were brown bear. I was up at 8,000 foot at a camp, Horn Creek, for those of you that are familiar with it. And brown bear live in that area. And we're upstairs. I'd been there about 3 days, and we're standing upstairs on the second floor balcony, and I'm watching a bear eat out of a slot barrel that we tied in a tree so he couldn't knock it down. We didn't have to clean up the mess the next morning. And he takes off. And it wasn't 10 minutes later, and a young man named Andrew comes walking out of the woods. He has no flashlight. He has no firearm. He has no way to defend himself. Andrew, it's okay. What? No, it's okay. They're black bear. They're scared of you. They'll run. One exception. If you come between mama and her cubs. Because mama will kill you. You don't hurt mama bear's cubs. I've been amazed. Craig mentioned I've got 3 kids. My baby's now 27. I've still seen mama bear get her claws out. My baby's in Florida. Mama bear still get her claws out. You don't mess with mama bear's cubs. Which we got to be real careful here. Storge can suck the life out of eros and philia. My own personal observation, it's my thoughts. Why do people get divorced 20, 25, 30 years? I think because they didn't choose to. Just over time, eros and philia eroded. It just went away. They didn't actively pursue it, weren't intentional about it, and they slowly just drifted apart. Because I am convinced when you have small children, you are not going to do something that lets them do without or lack. So if both parents work and you're taking care of the kids and you're trying to keep up with the house, how much emotional bandwidth, how much emotional endurance do you have left? Oh, by the way, yeah, we need to love on each other. You got to be careful with that. It will get away from you and it will bite you. I saw an article. Hollywood, I think, presents a lot of I'll love you as long as you love me. When you quit loving me, I'm out of here. But an article came up recently that kind of fits what I just described. I don't know if you're familiar with who Jessica Alba is, but that was who this was. She was having an interview. And she said, she shared on Instagram back in May, the couple had made their 16th anniversary. She said, I'm proud of us for making it this far. There's no real set of rules or guidance that can ever prepare you for what it means to commit to another person and choose to be family, she wrote. Through thick and thin, we have continually found our way back to each other and have chosen one another. But in April, she said she and her husband had just become roommates months before they split. Quote, "It was all rosy for 2.5 years, but then after that, you just become roommates." They drifted apart. Sounds like they just drifted apart. It's just like your roommates. You just go through the motions. It's the responsibility. It's a lot like checking the boxes, she said. I thought, how sad. That didn't sound like, hey, I'll love you as long as you love me or as long as you make me happy, but they just drifted apart. So I have permission. I'm going to throw somebody under the bus. There's a couple that go to church here. Been married 52 years. 3 or 4 times a year, they will go away on 3-day weekends just to spend time with each other. Just to hang out together. What's amazing is one of those times, they will intentionally pick something to work on to improve their marriage. What? I said, Keegan, really? He said, yeah. I never knew somebody that was that intentional. 52 years later, most of us want to sit on the couch and turn on the TV. Do something easy or relaxing. No, they're still intentional. I have a tremendous amount of respect. You want a resource after today? You want some help with this? Talk to Keegan and Terry. They're not the only ones, but that's who I talk to, and I have permission to share. I suspect a couple of others, but I didn't ask John and Jan if I could mention their names, so. It's hard, it's work, okay? Now, understand something. In your relationship, conflict is unavoidable. It is inevitable. However, conflict's important. It reveals that growth and change is happening. It also reveals that someone's wants or needs are not being met. The hard part is sometimes they may not be able to articulate that. They may not know exactly what's going on. All they know is, I'm frustrated. Okay. How do we respond to that? What do we do about that? You go, wow, Alan, we just jumped from love to conflict. Why? Because love is a choice and conflict is unavoidable. So how do we honor the Lord and faithfully execute our vows? Right? Okay, so I wanted to remind you of something. We're going to look at a verse, Philippians 1:6. Okay, remember this. Paul wrote, "And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns." There's a fancy theological word for what he just described there. Sanctification. Okay, you want a quick, easy, my definition for sanctification? It's progressive holiness. We're becoming more Christ-like. Or we should be. As somebody that follows Christ, that should be our goal and should be what we're working on. Okay? Marriage is going to create opportunities for growth. All right, we're going to cherry pick some verses out of Ephesians chapter 5. I don't know, verse 21. "And subject yourselves to one another in the fear of Christ." Some translations say submit to one another in the fear of Christ. Verse 25, Paul tells husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. Sometimes I have to stop and go, where does the end of that sacrifice, where is the end of that sacrifice, men? when we're sacrificing for our wife, when we're loving her as Christ loved the church, where does that stop? It never did for Christ, right? Verse 29, there's something special in this verse we're going to come back to, so I'm just going to read it. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. I'm reading out New American Standard because it chose to put the word cherish there. We're going to come back to that word. Okay? Verse 31, Paul's quoting Genesis, because this is where it all starts. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Okay? So, husbands, your wives need to know that you cherish her. I like that word better than say, you need to love her. That's true. That's not an accurate statement. But I like the nuances that come with the word cherish. When I cherish something, it's valuable. It's precious. It's something I'm going to protect. It's something I'm going to watch out for. And it's certainly something I never want to lose. If you get the privilege of inheriting something from your grandfather or your great-grandfather, maybe it's a firearm. Maybe it's a pocket knife. That's something that's very special, right? We're going to watch out for it. We're going to take care of it, right? We're going to cherish it. But our wives need to know that we cherish them. Okay? Wives, what does your husband need? He needs to know that you respect him. Paul wrote in Ephesians, to love your wife, wives, respect your husband. I remember an instance, I don't know, we might have been married a year and a half. We'd bought our first house. I can still see, I'm standing there in the living room, the kitchen, and the dining room are back here. We had a wall right here that had some special rustic wood on it, and we were having a disagreement. I don't like to lose. I want to win. I don't want to be wrong. And the more we argued, the more our voices went up, the more frustrated we were getting because she wasn't listening to me. And I don't have any idea why. I have no idea how this happened. I stopped right in the middle and I went, and I made a comment for reconciliation, for resolution. And the minute I did that, and I came down here and I said, okay, what do we do? Cindy's emotions went boop. And honestly, it kind of scared me. I didn't realize I had that much power. She was playing follow the leader. Did you get that? She was playing follow the leader, and I was leading her into conflict. And when I stopped, she was willing to follow me into resolution. Oh, I have no idea why that happened. To this day, I can't figure it out other than, thank you, Lord, that He chose to divinely intervene. All right, I'm going to throw a challenge out at you. Stop making everything about how your partner says something. Did you get that? Stop making everything about how your partner says something. Okay, of course, your partner could work on their tone of voice. But you keep creating the same vicious cycle when you don't address the main point of what they're saying. So in Matthew, it says, if you offend a brother, it's your responsibility to go talk to him. It also says, if your brother offends you, you have the responsibility to go talk to him. Both ways, the responsibility is on you. Why is it any different in a marriage? Sometimes we choose to make it different. That's the hard part, though, right? Galatians 5:17, for the flesh sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. There's a battle going on. Who's going to win? Jay Adams wrote a book back in the 1980s called Competent Counsel, and he said, we always do our natural first reaction. The unfortunate thing is that comes from the flesh. It comes from our sinful nature. It's easy because it's natural. It just comes first. I'm not happy. But Adams went on to say, but we have to practice that which is second nature. We have to practice obedience and responding in a way that would please the Lord. We keep practicing that. Eventually, the second nature becomes first nature. Or at least that's the goal. Right? That's back to Philippians 1:6, the sanctification. I want to grow more like Christ. I want to be kind and gentle to Cindy. Key word there was want. Hopefully this year I did better than I did last year. I don't want to take anything for granted. In the rest of Galatians 5:22 and 23, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. I had a young man in my office a couple of months ago, and he said, well, I'm starting to, because I always ask my clients, where are you spiritually? What does that mean to you? Because I don't want to offend them and I want to meet them where they are. Sometimes they're atheists, sometimes they're agnostic, sometimes they're very committed Christians. But this young man said, well, I'm starting to read my Bible again, but I do it in my dorm. I don't need to go to church. Oh, okay. So I told him, I said, I'd like to share something with you. There are 59 one another commands in the New Testament. If you're not involved in community, you can't do those. You can't have them done to you. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ. If you're not in community, you can't do those things. Later on, I was talking to Tim Ralston, and I shared that with him, and I said, what else would you have said? He said, fruit of the Spirit. We don't learn the fruit of the Spirit till we get in conflict. Marriage. Oh my goodness. Marriage is a great sanctification tool to learn the fruit of the Spirit. Do we respond with joy, peace? Are we patient with our spouse? Are we kind to them? Isn't it Proverbs? Love covers a multitude of sins, right? Do we allow them to make mistakes and let it go? Are we gentle? Do we show them self-control? Or do we show them our anger and frustration? See, conflict creates the opportunity to turn the fruit of the Spirit into practical reality instead of theoretical knowledge. We can come to church and talk about the fruit of the Spirit all day. We can memorize those verses. Man, I can quote those. I can tell you what they are. Can you do them? When the rubber meets the road and life gets tough, life gets hard, can you do them? I want to. Husbands, it's important that we respond in a way so that our wife always feels cherished, even in conflict. Wives, respond in a way so that your husband feels respected. If you don't respond that way, you cloud your message. You make it harder for your spouse to hear what you're saying. The challenge again, stop making everything about how your partner says something. Yes, your partner could work on their tone of voice, but if we focus on that, then we keep this vicious spiral, this cycle going when we don't address the main point of what they're saying. Cindy and I are both guilty of that at times, right? I've got a book here I'm going to share with you in a minute. H. Norman Wright wrote in his book, he's talking about James 1, verses 2 and 3. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing or trying of your faith produces endurance or maturity. He says, James says, be glad about it. Oh, a trial's hit. Great, let's start the party. That's what James says. Count it all joy. See, Wright says, with our marriage vow was a promise to suffer, a shared privilege to minister to one another in that. Life's hard. Situations, choices, there's lots of things that come up. If you got teenagers or older kids, you know this. Sometimes they don't make choices that we want them to make. And it creates issues, problems. We don't get to choose, right? But what I don't want to do is make my spouse the punching bag of my frustration, whether it be with my boss, with the bank account, because we're frustrated about the kids, whatever. I want her to always feel cherished. Conflict reveals the need for communication, to ask questions. I forgot it. I've got at home with this little round button. It says easy on it. It's from Staples. You push it and it goes, that was easy. I use that button because you know what? We've all got buttons. Cindy's got a button. You know how I know? I created it. I'm owning it. I created it. I didn't want to. And it took me a long time to realize why I kept getting the response I got when I hit that button. Oh, it's my fault. But I don't even have to hit the button. I can just get close to it. And she doesn't like it. But it's my fault. I created it. Right? I need to ask questions. You know what I've learned, though, about other buttons? Sometimes they're because of fears or concerns. Sometimes I may not get an action or a reaction that I want, but I've learned to start, oh, wait a minute, that's because of this. Okay, that's what's going on. We need to have a discussion. I want to settle those fears. I want to eradicate those concerns. I want to improve our communication. Sometimes it's just she didn't understand what I was wanting to do, and when I explain it, it's good. See, folks, the purpose of questions is to really understand your spouse and their needs. Asking questions, though, is not a chess match. We're not trying to gather information so I can back you into a corner and go, okay, gotcha, checkmate, you're wrong. If you do that, I'm sorry, if you're trying to win, there's only two losers. You will never win in an argument with your spouse. It's not about winning. You need to look for resolution or reconciliation, whatever the issue is, whatever's going on. Okay? Do you know the difference between I statements and you statements? You statements. You made me mad. You did this. You know what? If I use you statements, I put her on the defensive. And it makes it harder for her to hear what I'm trying to communicate, okay? If I use I statements, I felt disrespected. I felt frustrated. I didn't understand why this occurred. It allows her to keep her defenses down and for us to have better communication. See, folks, only if you really understand your spouse's needs can resolution of the conflict occur. There's a man named John Gottman who's studied marriages for over 30 years. He's not a believer. He says that there up to 60% of conflict in a marriage will never be resolved. I can't buy that. I think he's way too high. I also think he's discounting or not opening up the opportunity for divine intervention, for the Lord and the Holy Spirit to work in your spouse. But I do know this, there are some things you're never going to reach resolution on. Sometimes Cindy's wants and needs are here, and sometimes mine are here. And we're not on the same plane. Okay. Gottman says the people that are the masters at relationships have learned to dance around that. They don't ever stop. They try, but they communicate, but they understand something. The relationship is more important than what we're fighting about. See, we've got two choices. If I had my button. The button's going to represent conflict. So we got two choices. I can stand on one side and Cindy can stand on the other side, and we can fight all day about it. And we don't get anywhere. But if I can get both of us on the same side, whether that's moving or her moving, I don't care. If we're working together, then there's a greater chance we can resolve or make it much smaller where it's not a big issue anymore. But it's all about desire. It's a choice, right? Love is a choice. How do you choose to treat your spouse, right? Only if your spouse feels safe, this is really important, only if your spouse feels safe will they really open up and be transparent to you. If you treat your spouse in a manner that they don't feel safe, that they feel hurt, they are not going to open up. They are not going to be transparent. You're going to have a much harder time for resolution. You're going to have a much harder time reducing conflict, okay? There's a real interesting guy. His name is Dr. Amir Levine. He wrote a book called Attached, and it's dealing with adult attachment styles. He is not a believer. He is very much an atheist, and he's very much coming at this from an evolutionary process because he keeps talking about how humans evolved in things. But people have attachment styles. You're either secure, it's about 50% of the population. You're good with when you form a relationship and you can relax and you don't feel threatened. Then there are people that have anxious attachment styles. They need more reinforcement. They need more affirmation that y'all as a couple are good. And then there's an avoidant person, because an avoidant person with you is going to pull you close with one hand and push you away with the other. If you're single, I would encourage you to read the book, because if you're an anxious person, you should never date somebody that's avoidant. You're setting yourself up for a lot of heartache. I mention those because if you decide, hey, I want to look into this more, or we've got some issues, seek help. Find somebody that can assist you. Scripture says there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. We're not supposed to walk this path alone. God created us for community. Make that relationship the best it can be. Okay? But it's really interesting because Dr. Levine in chapter 2 of his book is talking about, and he says this, when a couple comes together, physiologically they become one flesh. I started giggling. I've got it on Audible. Somebody's reading it to me and he says that, and I was like, thanks, Dr. Obvious. I appreciate that extra information. God told us that in Genesis. But he quotes a couple of scientific studies to prove his point. You see, your spouse regulates your blood pressure. They regulate your heart rate. They have an effect on your hormone levels. You are no longer separate entities, he says. They regulate your cycle and social well-being. He pushes back against codependency, and I think he's partially right. Codependency can be very negative, can be harmful. But you know what? There's a good codependency because God created us as couples to need each other, to support one another. Cindy has strengths that are my weaknesses. Some of it's been a little slow in me realizing that, but I need her. I want her input. I want her thoughts. It's an elegant coexistence, he said. I think he's spot on. I have some here. Let me read something to you. We're real close to closing. H. Norman Wright's book, Communication, Key to Your Marriage. I heard about this book 40 years ago. The pastor that performed the wedding ceremony for Cindy and I mentioned this book. I've always thought of it through the years. I kind of blew it off and thought, well, that's a long time ago. About 4 months ago, we were eating lunch with Terry and Keegan brought the book up. What? Wait a minute. He goes, it's good. You know what? He's right. It really is. We've got 2 copies. I bought it because I wanted to see what I could learn to use in my counseling, but I also bought Cindy a copy. We sit in the living room, we'll read a chapter, we'll discuss it together. I'm sorry, that's been the goal. How long ago, babe? 4 months ago? Something like that? Yeah, I think we're on chapter 4. We keep getting busy and forget. Wait a minute, let's get back to the book. But I want to read you something out of the book. He says, keep in mind that in a healthy marriage, you look out for number 2 rather than number 1. You energize your spouse rather than drain energy from him or her. You eliminate blaming and shaming. You know what? The only rule book, the only instruction manual we have when we come into marriage is what was modeled before us. If your parents had a great relationship and did it great, fantastic. If not, okay, you're kind of behind the 8 ball. You've got stuff to learn. Because we have a tendency to model what we saw. Unless something happens to you like happened to me, and I got to watch Ron and Vicky, and I went into it day 1 going, I want what you've got. Eliminate blaming and shaming. You're willing to learn from your partner. You end disagreements with a feeling of resolve. I love this one. You feel better after a disagreement. If you handle it right, you're going to feel closer and better after a disagreement. Ooh, what a concept. A warning. It's normal to talk to oneself, right? We talk to ourselves, but be aware of this. Most of your emotions, such as anger, depression, guilt, and worry, are initiated and escalated because of your self-talk. The way you behave toward your spouse is determined by your self-talk and not necessarily by their behavior. What you say and how you say it is a direct expression of what you say to yourself. Okay? Self-talk, or your inner conversation, is not an emotion or feeling, and it's not an attitude. However, repetitious self-talk turns into attitudes, turns into values, turns into beliefs. So be careful when you get frustrated with your spouse. I didn't say if, I said when, right? We all do. Be careful when you do that, though, that you don't do a lot of negative self-talk in your head about your spouse, because that'll affect your attitudes, actions, and behaviors towards them.